Thanks, Morgan. Thanks for that very interesting and eclectic introduction.
Well,
It's appropriate.
I say eclectic. So Rick was, as I understand it, born at West Point.
That's true.
Into a big military family, and now lives as a hippie on Hawaii. So there's a big continuum.
That is not untrue.
So Rick got his undergraduate degree from the School of Mines, and after graduation went in as an officer to the U.S. Army and spent 6 or 7 years in the Army, including as a commander in the Persian Gulf War, and then decided to come back to mines. And so I think it would be interesting to hear how that decision process happened.
Absolutely. Let me get my clicker and I'll tell you all about it. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you guys. And there are a lot of students here, so I actually changed I've spent the last few days on campus. I'm on the Board of Governors, and with all the homecoming stuff going on, I've talked to a lot of students. So I changed up my presentation a little bit here to talk to you primarily. And so the reason I ended up back at Mines, as you said, Morgan, I had left the Army, decided I was going to settle back in the Denver area, and I didn't want to go to business school, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I thought maybe I'd go to medical school. So I went to the Anschutz School and talked to the dean, and maybe law school. So I went to the DU dean and I talked to them about law school. And I said, well, if I was going to get a technical degree, it would be in hydrology. And I thought that was a really exciting, interesting time back in the late 1980s, seeing where things were going in the western U.S. with water, that it made sense. And it turns out that my old advisor as a freshman and a physics major, Frank Schoengart, was now the dean of students, and so I called him up and came in and talked to him and said, at the time Mines had absolutely the best hydro program in the country, maybe the world. The International Groundwater Modeling Center just moved here from The Hague, and it was exciting times. And so I had a lot of PTSD from being an undergrad here in the early '80s still. And so I wasn't sure, my knees were knocking when I got on campus, and went in and talked to Frank, and as always, he was a really wonderful, warm human being. Went on to be a really successful director at NASA after his time at Mines. And unlike the other deans who spent time telling me how great their programs are, Frank actually took the time and said, what was the Army like? What did you like about it? What did you get out of it? What did it teach you about where you're going next? And the one thing I could come up with that I liked about the Army at the time was the sense of purpose. That when you're in military service, it's an obvious example of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. And that's an incredibly rewarding way to be. And I said, if I could find that kind of rewarding career in the private sector, that's what I'm after. And so Frank looks at me, he flips on his overhead projector on his desk. Anybody here that knows what an overhead projector is of a certain age, but it used to be a form of punishment used in the classroom where you'd have, project off these overhead slides one after the other. We used to call it death by view graph. But Frank had a whole bunch of these slides, and he pulled this slide out. It looked a little bit like this. It was way more accurate. He had like data points, and he had error bars and all that stuff. But essentially what it shows is the surface area of the Earth per person over the last 200,000 years of evolution. So this is where Frank Schoengart took the conversation. And what he said is, if you look at this, what it means is sometime in the next century, so this is now that he was talking about, this line theoretically, because population grows exponentially and because it's on the surface of a sphere, it actually turns out to be a straight line. And that straight line is headed towards zero, which theoretically would mean every inch of the planet is covered by a human being, obviously impossible. And so his point to me was that this straight line is everything we are. It is our DNA. It is how we think of the world. It's how we've grown as a species of unlimited growth with unconstrained resources. And then he pulled up a second slide and said, in the next human lifetime, we have to figure out as a global society how to get off that line, go against everything in our human nature and our DNA, and flatten that line to a sustainable, steady state where we can live with the resources we've got. And he went on to say, in his opinion, if the species lasted, that the humans he's talking about here, lasted another 200,000 years, this moment, this lifetime that we're living in right now, it will be seen as the greatest feat of human endeavor ever, because it's that challenging. And the way Frank saw it and the way he explained it to me is, in order for us to get through that curve, we have to have leadership. We have to have political leadership. We have to have cultural leadership. And we also have to have technical leadership. And he explained to me that in his opinion, the purpose and the mission of the Colorado School of Mines was to create the leaders, the technical leaders that are going to get us through this curve. And that was it. Before I left his office, I knew I was going to come back to mines and study. And I have to say, this inspiration from Frank has really, I think, Morgan, more than anything else, it's really been the guiding sort of inspiration for my career.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, I've gotten to know Rick over the past couple of years and learned quite a bit. So you go back to graduate school. I like how you talk about PTSD from being a student at Mines, but not 7 years in the Army.
Yeah,
it
was a lot
easier. That's rather telling. But so you come back. You think you're gonna maybe get a PhD. You do your graduate studies, and then you work in a few companies, and then move into private equity and start Renova Capital. And what's that journey like from a technical engineer and the military to private equity?
Yeah, really interesting. It's funny. I often find myself in boardrooms with a bunch of bankers or lawyers and finance people, and I'm very often the only one in the room with a technical background. And so I don't need to know much to know more than they do about a lot of stuff. And I often remind myself, in the valley of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So it actually has served me really well. And as an entrepreneur, did a number of venture capital-backed startups, including what I think is still the largest private water utility in the state of Colorado. We did the very first privatization of municipal utilities in the U.S. As a young company back a long time ago, and had a series of really interesting experiences and some good success as an entrepreneur. So about 20 years ago, I had an idea for a new kind of private equity group. And that company that we started was called Renova Capital. Renova Capital ran for about 16 years, and at the end of 2022, my partners and I wound it up successfully. We built a couple $1 billion worth of sustainable infrastructure, made a lot of money for a lot of people, and I went off to Kauai, where I'm still working a lot as a consultant, but I'm not worried about making payroll every week anymore. It's very nice. But Renova was a really interesting endeavor for a number of reasons. We put it together to identify new technologies, new exciting innovations in energy, and taking those new innovations to market, to get them to, as they say in the finance world, to full commercial acceptance. In other words, you want a bank to be able to bank that technology. Well, the specific problem that we were addressing at Renova for entrepreneurs was a huge gap that still exists in the U.S. capital markets, right? So the way money is organized in the U.S., you have venture capital. Venture cap guys are really good at helping you take an idea and turn it into a product. Okay, and once that product is tried and true, it's been demonstrated to work multiple times, and very importantly, it has predictable economics around it. then the banks will bank it all day long. They can't get enough of it. But until you get to that point, you're on your own. And unlike building software platforms, if you're in the industry, in the energy industry, and you're trying to innovate technology, at some point, somebody's going to have to stroke a really big, like $100 million check to do the first commercial scale, whatever it is you're inventing, and see if it works. And that money doesn't really exist. So we created Renova to creatively work with the banks, with investors, and with these young growth companies to creatively meter capital into those companies, get to the point where we could commercially demonstrate them, and then take them out at scale. And what was especially novel about our approach it was our focus on efficiency. So the graph you see up here, I think this is last year's data, so 2023. We produced over 100 quads of energy in the United States last year. So that's 100 quadrillion BTUs of energy. That's a lot of energy, right? We generated that much, but we only used 2/3 of it. And in fact, about 1/3 of that was wasted to system inefficiency. And in fact, 20 years ago when we put Renova together, it was more like almost 2/3 of the energy was being wasted due to system inefficiency. And what we believed was that in the energy industry specifically, the metric to watch is how much of that efficiency, that system inefficiency, can you claw back? Because if you have a new technology that claws back system inefficiencies, that's found money. There's not a winner and a loser, there's just winners. There's just more money in the equation to do stuff. And so we look at the energy transition as not, oh my God, we just woke up and realized we have dirty energy, we have to get clean energy. That may be a realization people have, but that's not what's driving things. This is just a continuation of an inevitable march to more efficient stuff. And you're not going to be able to stop it. And you know, the great thing is at the end of the day, it's a meritocracy, and that efficiency will really determine, we believe, more than anything else, the winners and the losers out there. And so I'll give you one example. I think we have time for one good war story. I've got about 1 million of them, but one of the early companies that we started was a company called Main Street Power. And Main Street Power was headquartered up on the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder because we could get lots of people to come work for us for really free, for cheap, if we were on Pearl Street. So whatever we paid for office rent, we made back in payroll. And the idea with Main Street Power was to develop distributed solar, so rooftop solar, and use power purchase agreements to sell that power to whoever that home or business owner was. And back then that seemed insane. And the reason was because our whole energy system, our electrical system, was designed in the 1800s around big central coal plants and then wires going out to run light bulbs and a few things in between. And the reason we started doing that is because we were taking coal, putting it in trucks, shipping it to people's homes, shoveling it into boilers to heat our homes. And it turns out it's way more efficient to deliver electrons on a wire than coal in the back of a truck. And so we switched over to electricity, but still maintained coal as a really great high density, very, actually compared to what was happening at the time, very efficient way to create energy for everybody. And so now we go to solar power. And the knee-jerk reaction, the muscle memory of the industry is, oh, okay, well, we had a big giant central coal plant. Take that out, put a big giant central gas plant in. Okay, take that out, put a big giant centralized solar farm in. Okay, but stop. It no longer efficient because there's no fuel. The fuel is the sunshine, right? So if this fuel is everywhere, why aren't you building the generation capacity where the load is? And it turns out if our current grid was reconfigured into a more of a fractal grid where you had generation and solar at the endpoints, the whole system is about 40% more efficient. 40% more efficient. We're trying to scrape for reducing carbon emissions, and a third of our energy is going to waste, and we know how to fix it, right? Well, one of the ways to fix it is distributed power. So we took a very contrarian point of view. We partnered with Morgan Stanley, and we figured out a way to overcome the status quo and bring this new, more efficient model to the market. Now, it wasn't easy. The reason that we're doing these big, giant plants is it isn't just because that's what we're used to doing, but it's what we want. I mean, we do big things well in America, right? So the banks want big projects, not little projects. The big construction companies need big projects, not tiny little projects. Takes the same energy to run a big or a small project, they'll tell you. And to a large degree, it's the regulatory framework. I mean, Xcel Energy, for all the great work they're doing out here, as we heard, it's not our job to innovate. What? It's not? Okay, so whose job is it? Since you have a complete regulatory control on the system we're using, and any benefits to that system benefit you, who's going to pay for the innovation? And that's where everything always gets stuck. So what we had to do at Main Street Power is figure out that, okay, first of all, we're only working behind the meter. It's an unregulated space. We can work around regulations. We would get Morgan Stanley to finance these tiny little rooftop projects and aggregate them on their balance sheet until we get, say, $50 million worth of projects, and then they could securitize the cash flows out in the capital markets and make money. And that's standard business today, but no one had done that before Main Street Power. And so we worked around all the status quo. And now that company, we sold that company a few years back to AES, which is a big multinational utility, and it's now, you now know it as AES Clean Energy. And it's last year it was the 5th largest solar developer in the world, still focused on distributed. They're now installing a little over 1 megawatt a day around the world. It certainly wasn't that big when I ran things, I guarantee you. But those are the kind of success stories that we got to participate in at Renova Capital. It was an incredible experience. And I thought, Morgan, I was going to talk a little bit more about that, but with all the conversations I've had with the students out there, I really wanted to share a couple of just basic things. So I threw this slide together last night. It's kind of sad and also rewarding to take 40 years of experience and put it in like 5 bullets. But here you go. So to the extent this is of any value to the entrepreneurs out there, when we looked at, we looked at hundreds and hundreds of new technologies and invested in just a few. And that was, we invested in new ways to generate power, transportation technologies, as well as the built environment. In fact, one of the companies we invested in last month just finished the world's first zero-net energy high-rise in Seattle. So we've opened up a new asset class to the real estate market. But in every case, we had to make sure we didn't get excited about the wrong projects. You have to make sure that whatever you put on the starting line is going to get to the finish line and make money for your investors. So this is the approach we took. We asked 5 questions, and I'll tell you guys, this will serve you well if you're an entrepreneur, if you're over at the Beck Center trying to figure out how to create a company. The 5 questions that you have to be able to answer is, what problem are you solving? It's maybe the most difficult question to answer of all, but what problem are you solving and for whom? How big is your potential market? Second is, what is your unfair competitive advantage? Because if you don't have an unfair advantage, you're going to have a hard time overtaking the status quo in the industry. How do you make money? What's your business structured like? What's the business model? Why is your team the best team in the world to do this? In other words, why aren't the incumbents just going to crush you and take your idea? And lastly, you're asking for money. What do you need the money for? And do you really understand what your costs are and what it's going to take? And so if you can answer those 5 questions as an entrepreneur, you've got a business plan. And so for us, the things that we guarded against, and the list on the right here, the litmus tests, were kind of 5 commandments that we really paid attention to keep us out of trouble. Number 1, as I said, is follow the efficiency. What's interesting, I find this really interesting as an engineer, is if you look at all of the different metrics around how you can gauge or predict the success of a new company, what we found is in the energy space, it doesn't matter where your money comes from or what your team is or who's backing you or whatever. It's about if you're successful, what's the potential efficiency gain out there in our system from your technology? And the size of that efficiency clawback defines more than any other metric how big your company could potentially get, how much value you're creating in the marketplace, and how much money you can make for investors. So extremely helpful metric for us. We also made sure we avoided the energy-water nexus, right? So for you, I think everybody has a general idea of what that means. In a place like California, something like 20% of the water is used to generate electricity, and something like 20% of the electricity is used to move water around the state. And so it just feeds on itself, and it's incredibly inefficient. So hydro has this problem. We're seeing big issues in Central America around this with the drought right now. But it also comes to play in things like hydrogen. It takes 10 gallons of water to make the equivalent with electrolysis of a gallon of gasoline worth of energy in hydrogen. So can you imagine trying to sell hydrogen cars when you're saying to people, well, okay, so it's like you go to the gas station, and for every gallon of hydrogen in, you kind of have a second nozzle, and you have to put 10 gallons of water in your car for every gallon of fuel. That seems like a really stupid idea, right? Well, that's going to have to get overcome in hydrogen, along with the round-trip efficiencies that they're struggling with. Never count on regulations, ever. If you have a business that requires a carbon credit or a REC or some kind of incentive program to be profitable, you are not going to make it. It doesn't work that way. And another key component here is to not boil the ocean, right? To boil one kettle at a time. Make sure that you're laser focused, precisely what your technology is doing, and you're not trying to do 20 different things with it. And lastly, and this is maybe the most important, and this brings me back to why I'm now involved at Mines, is the so what question. Okay, so I can tell you I've talked to hundreds of engineers, scientists, inventors who have created these elegant solutions to which there is no problem. And those will never, ever sell to anyone ever. And so you have to understand the context. You have to understand not pitching the components and the details of your product. You don't pitch that. You pitch the benefit that your product brings to the market. And if you really, truly don't understand who benefits from this and does that line up with who's paying for this, you're never going to get anywhere. And it sounds simple, but it's a really hard thing to do. And I got to tell you, Morgan, this is why I've really started focusing my work here at Mines with the Payne Institute, because the Colorado School of Mines, I love this place, and Paul and Walt and Brian, we've talked about this multiple times. The school's really lousy at that so what. Like, we've got some really cool, complicated, exciting technical shit going on out here. So what? Who cares? Why does it matter? And what a world-class research university has to have is it has to have that forum for so what. And that's what the Payne Institute is to this school. It brings together government, academia, private sector, industry, and very importantly, and more recently, tribal communities, which are absolutely a key part of this solution. Brings them together and discusses the power and the opportunity of all the great work that's going on here at the School of Mines, right? So people all understand we're a great oil and gas university. We're a great mineral university. I just found out this week we have the largest EE department in the state of Colorado. let's talk about that, right? And so why is that important? Well, because of all the stuff we've talked about today. And yet, why is oil and gas still relevant? Well, last time I checked, 80% of the energy consumed globally is still at fossil fuels. So exactly how are you going to figure out an energy transition to more efficiency if you're not working together with all of the energy verticals? And so that's what Mines does better than anybody else. I don't know of a single university left in the United States that actually provides the disciplines in research and academics for every single skill technically that's needed to get through the energy transition. And we are an all of the above school, and the solutions that this planet's going to find are all of the above solutions. And that's why I'm so excited, Morgan. I'm so proud of the work you and Greg and the team at Paynes has done, because you're bringing relevance and context to the average person on the street and to the policymakers like the governor and Senator Hickenlooper, both which presented important thoughts here in the last week. It answers the question of, if School of Mines is such an important place, let's not forget why, right? So what? So I think Frank would be proud of us. I think that in talking to the students here at Mines, you guys get this, you understand the so what. And so to the extent I can help this incredible place get out in the social consciousness, I'm excited to do it, even if it's from the North Shore of Kauai.
Terrific. Rick, thank you so much. Really wise words. Thank you so much.
You bet.